Alrighty, in this section, we're going to be solving using another method, and this method is called completing the square. So in order to solve using this method, you're going to have your equation set up just like this. So you're going to have your x squared and your x on one side and your constant, your plain number, on the other side of the equals. If it's not set up like this, you're going to need to move that number over to the other side. So if we look at this first example, it's already set up like that. It has the x squared, the minus 12x on the left side, and equals that negative 11 on the right side. So the first step is that we need to take the b. So if you look, the a in our equation was 1. The b in our equation is a negative 12, and the c is negative 11. So in this, we're going to take the b, which was negative 12, and we're going to divide it by 2, so that would be negative 6. And then we're going to square that number, giving us positive 36. So what we had x squared minus 12x, and it equaled negative 11. What you're going to do is you're going to take, I like to call, it just says c, but I like to call this our new c. You're going to take this new c, and you're going to add it to both sides of your equation. So that 36 is going to be on both sides of your equation. So if we take that, we're going to go to the next step. And in order for us to get from here to here, we are going to factor. So if you look and you were to think about your box, we need something that we already know, it's x and x. But in order to multiply to be 36 and add to be negative 12, it would be a negative 6 and a negative 6. Then I can add these two numbers together on the right side. Negative 12 or negative 11 plus 36 would be a positive 25. Now, moving on to the next step, it says that we have something squared. And if you notice, these two factors were exactly the same. So since they were exactly the same, we can write it as x minus 6 squared, and it still equals 25. Now, since those were exactly the same and we could write it as squared, we can start to solve. Let's write solve by square root method. Okay, so we are going to take the square root on both sides of our equation, which is going to cancel out that squared, leaving us with just x minus 6. And if we take the square root of 25, it equals 5. And notice, since we took the square root on both sides, they put that plus or minus symbol in there for us. Now, our last step, we have x minus 6 equals positive 5 and negative 5. So I'm going to write that in two separate equations. X minus 6 equals a positive 5, and x minus 6 equals a negative 5. So if I solve these, if I add 6, my first answer would be 11. And if I add 6 on this equation, my x would also equal positive 1. So we have our two solutions of 11 and positive 1. Alrighty, let's try the next example. Again, our equation is already set up for us, showing us that our a is 1, our b is 18, and our c is 7. Okay, so we're going to first start off by trying to find what we call the new c. So we're going to do that by taking the b, which was 18, and dividing it by 2, which would give us 9. And then we're going to square it, giving us 81. So our equation originally was x squared plus 18x equals 7. Now remember, we're going to take that number that we found and we're going to add it to both sides. So we're going to put 81 on both sides of our equation. So on this one, we are going to factor in order to get to our next step. So in order to multiply to be 81 and add to be 18, that would be 9 times 9. If you need to make a box in order to factor that, go ahead. So now that we have that, we can look at the right side of our equation, and I have 7 plus 81, which is going to give me 88. So now that I have that, I'm going to go to my next line, and I can see that an x plus 9 and an x plus 9 are exactly the same, so I can write that as x plus 9 squared. And it still equals 88, which now I can solve by the square root method, and I'm going to take the square root on both sides of my equation, which is going to cancel out my squared, leaving me with an x plus 9 equals the square root of 88. Now, if I plug the square root of 88 into my calculator, it gives me a decimal. So I want to see if I can break down that square root of 88. So 88 can break down to 8 and 11. 8 can break down to 4 and 2. 4 can break down to 2 and 2. And that looks like it's as far as I can go. So I have a pair of 2's and a leftover 2 and a leftover 11. So I always write my pair out front, so that 2 is going to go out front for my pairs. And then my leftovers are going to go underneath my square root. So the 2 is going to go underneath and the 11, and I'm going to multiply those, giving me 22. So now in order to finish, I need to solve. Unlike the last example, we are not able to add anything to something with a square root. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to subtract 9 on both sides of my equation. And the way I would like you to write this is put your number out front, not the radical. So that negative 9 is going to go in front. And it was plus a 2 square root of 22. And we had a negative 9 minus 2 square root of 22. And those are your two solutions. Alrighty, let's look at the next example. So if you look at it, I first notice that my equation equals 0, which in this case, with completing the square, I do not want it to equal 0. So I'm going to subtract this 5 over to the other side, giving me x squared minus 6x equals negative 5. So now that I have that number on the right side of my equation, I can start to try to find my new c. So first off, I see that my a was 1, my b is negative 6, and my c is negative 5. So in order to find my new c, I need to take, so we're trying to find that new c. I'm going to take my b, which was negative 6, divide it by 2. So that would give me negative 3. And if I square that number, negative 3 squared would give me positive 9. So in my original equation, I had x squared minus 6x equals negative 5. And I'm going to take that new c that I just found, and I'm going to put it on both sides of my equation. So 9 is going to go here and here. So in order to get from this step to this step, I'm going to factor. So I need something to multiply to be positive 9 and add to be negative 6, which would be minus 3 and minus 3. On this side, I can put my like terms together. Negative 5 plus 9 would be 4. And then I know, since I have the same thing right here, which should happen every single time, I can rewrite that as x minus 3 squared, and it still equals 4. Okay, I'm going to start to solve this by taking the square root on both sides of my equation, which is going to cancel out that squared, leaving me with x minus 3 equals, they put that plus or minus in there since we took the square root on both sides, and the square root of 4 I know is 2. So I can break this down. I know that x minus 3 equals positive 2 and x minus 3 equals negative 2. So if I solve both of these equations, I'm going to add 3 on both sides to give me x equals 5. On this one, I'm going to also add 3 on both sides, giving me x equals 1. So my two solutions are 5 and 1. Okay, on example 4, again, we do not have that plain number on the right side. So I need to move that 15. So I'm going to add 15 on both sides, giving me x squared plus 2x equals positive 15. So now that I have that, my A is 1, my B is 2, and my C is 15. So I need to take that B in order to find my new C. And I'm going to take B, which was 2, divide it by 2, which would give me 1. And I'm going to square it. 1 squared would be 1. So in my original equation, I had x squared plus 2x equals 15. And now I'm going to add that new C on both sides of my equation. So I'm going to put 1 here and 1 here. Okay, so in order to get from here to here, I need to factor. And I know that in order to be multiply to be 1 and add to be 2, that would be a positive 1 and a positive 1. And it equals, if I add my like terms together, a positive 16. Since these two factors were exactly the same, I can write it as x plus 1 squared, and it still equals 16. Now I can start to solve by square rooting on both sides, giving me an x plus 1 equals, and the square root of 16 is going to give me a plus or minus 4. So I have two different equations. X plus 1 equals 4, and x plus 1 equals negative 4. So if I solve, I can subtract 1, leaving me with positive 3. And I can subtract 1 again on my second equation, giving me negative 5. So here are my two solutions. Alrighty, let's do some more examples. We have an x squared plus 10x equals 16. So I already have my equation set up, which means that my A was 1, my B is 10, and my C is 16. So I need to start off by finding my new C. And I'm going to do that by taking my B, which was 10, and I'm going to divide it by 2, giving me 5. And I'm going to square that 5, giving me a positive 25. So in my original equation, I had x squared plus 10x equals 16. Now I'm going to take that new C that I found, and I'm going to put that number on both sides. So 25 on the left and 25 on the right. So I'm going to keep going, and I'm going to factor my left side of my equation. In order to get that, I need to multiply to be 25 and add to be 10. So that would be x plus 5 and x plus 5. Then if I add my right side together, 25 plus 16 would give me a positive 41. So I know since these two factors were the same, I can write it as x plus 5 squared equals 41. Alrighty, and then I can start to try to solve. So if I square root on both sides, it cancels out my squared, leaving me with an x plus 5 equals, and if I put square root of 41 into my calculator, it gives me a decimal. Now if I tried to break it down, again, 41 is a prime number, so I'm not able to break this down. So I'm going to leave it as square root of 41. Now if I solve this equation, I can finish it off by subtracting 5, which is going to leave me with a negative 5 plus square root of 41 and a negative 5 minus square root of 41. All right, next example. Again, we have our number on that right side, which is perfect. So we have an A that was 1, a B that was -4, and a C that's positive 21. So I'm going to start off by trying to find that new C, and I'm going to take our B, which was -4, and divide it by 2, which is going to give me -2. And then -2 squared is going to give me a +4. So I'm going to fill out my equation. I had an x squared minus 4x, and it equaled 21. And I'm going to add that new C on both sides of my equation. So 4 is going to go on the left and the right. So on this left side, I'm going to factor, and I'm going to do that. I need to multiply to be +4 and add to be -4. So that's going to be an x minus 2 and an x minus 2. I can also add my like terms together on the right. 21 plus 4 is going to give me 25. Then I know that my factors were exactly the same, so x minus 2 squared is another way you could write it, and it still equals 25, which allows me to start to solve by square rooting both sides, canceling out that squared, leaving me with an x minus 2 equals, and I am able to do the square root of 25, giving me +5. So that's going to leave me with an x minus 2 equals +5, and an x minus 2 equals a -5. So if I solve this, I can add 2 on both sides, giving me my first answer of 7. And I'm going to add 2 on this side as well, giving me my second answer of -3. Alrighty, last two examples. On this first one, it is already solved where my number is on that right side, which is perfect. So I'm going to start off by trying to find my new C. So I can see that I had an A of 1, a B of 16, and a C of 12. So if I want to find the new C for that left side, I'm going to take B, which was 16, and divide it by 2, so that's going to give me 8. And 8 squared is going to give me +64. So my original equation was x squared plus 16x, and it equaled 12. Then I need to take that new C that I just found of 64, and I'm going to add it on both sides, 64 on the left and 64 on the right. So if I factor this left side, I know that I need to multiply to be 64 and add to be 16. So that's going to be an x plus 8 and an x plus 8. Then I can add my like terms together on that right side. 12 plus a 64 is going to give me a 76. Since these factors were exactly the same, I can rewrite it as x plus 8 squared, and it still equals 76. In order to start to solve, I can break this down by taking the square root on both sides, leaving me with an x plus 8 equals, and if I put square root of 76 in my calculator, it gives me a decimal, which I do not want, but if I try to break this down, it still is not able to break down, so I'm going to leave it as square root of 76. So I'm just going to start to solve by subtracting 8, which is going to leave me with a -8 plus square root of 76 and a -8 minus square root of 76. Alrighty, last example. My equation doesn't look like it's solved yet, so I need to move this 17 to the other side. So I'm going to subtract 17 to the other side, leaving me with x squared minus 10x equals -17. So then I'm able to see that my A was 1, my B was -10, and my C is a -17. So I'm going to take that to find my new C, and I'm going to take the B, which was negative 10. And I'm going to divide it by 2, giving me negative 5. And negative 5 squared is going to be a positive 25. So my equation originally was x squared minus 10x equals negative 17. And I'm going to put that new c of positive 25 on both sides of my equation. So if I factor this left side, I need to multiply to be 25 and add to be negative 10. So that would be an x minus 5 and an x minus 5. Alrighty, then I can also add my like terms together on the right. Negative 17 plus 25 is going to leave me with a positive 8. Since my factors were the same, I can write that as x minus 5 squared. And it still equals a positive 8, which can allow me to start to solve by square rooting on both sides. Canceling out that squared, leaving me with an x minus 5. And if I type in square root of 8 into my calculator, it gives me a decimal, which I do not want. But I can break this down. 8 breaks down to 2 times 4. And 4 can break down to 2 times 2. So that leaves me with a pair of 2's and a leftover 2. So I can write my pair out front and my leftover inside the parentheses. So 2 square root of 2. Then to finish it off, I'm going to add 5 on both sides. And since I can't put those together, I'm going to put, we had a positive 5 plus 2 square root of 2. We also had a positive 5 minus 2 square root of 2.